Hey everybody, it is Sunday afternoon and it is time to take another trip around the world. I don't really feel like I've got a lot to talk about this week, but I have done some water changes and a few little bits of maintenance here and there and trimmed up some plants and so on and so forth, so it's worth walking around the room and having a look at all the different tanks and talking about what's going on, so we're going to do just that. We're going to start here at my 29 miscellaneous as we always do. Again, not really much to talk about. I know it really looks like this tank needs some maintenance, but I did a water change on it, I don't know, within the last week probably. I did not get in and wipe down the glass, as you can probably tell, but I did change the filters, and you can already see we're starting to get some backflow through the middle there. I don't know what it is about this tank, why the filters get clogged up so fast, and it's not the filters, as I've said before, it's the biosponges. The biosponges grow so much crud in there so quickly that about every third filter change, I have to get in there and scrub those biofilters out to get the water flowing nice and freely again. So I don't know what it is about this tank, but it's kind of nice in the sense that I've always got a source of biomaterial. If I ever need to sort of spike a tank and get it going, or I do something, I make some sort of mistake or something and I wipe out the cycle in one of my tanks or something, I've always got some good squeezins, because you can definitely do that to boost the cycle in a tank you're trying to get started or trying to get cycled in. You can take a sponge out of an existing tank and scrub it through the water and everything. Now remember, the bacteria won't live in the water column per se, but putting them in the tank gets them in there, and it allows them to float around until they come in contact with surface area that they can adhere to and then begin colonizing and so on and so forth. So if you've got that availability, it's always nice. And I've always got that availability, the way the sponge filters in this tank just load up so quickly. So I did shoot a video the other day with my loaches in here. I have not yet posted it at the time of recording this video. I'm not so sure about the time you're actually watching this video. You'll probably have already seen it. I did a tank cam of my striated loaches, or my zebra loaches, and it features a great deal of my little Bolivian ram coming up and poking around in front of the camera, nibbling on the shrimp pellets I put in there too. So if you haven't seen that one yet, that was a good one worth watching. These loaches are just adorable little fish. I absolutely love them. They really are about as close to a puppy dog in fish form as you're probably ever going to find. They're awesome little fish. Love my loaches. So moving on from my 29 to my 55-gallon gourami tank, which a lot of you may think probably should be called my angelfish tank, but it is not. This is my gourami tank, and it has been for years. At one point, I had 8 gouramis in here. I think I had 2 moonlights, 2 of the opaline, 2 gold, and 2 snakeskin. And then I think I had 2 dwarf gouramis in here too. And needless to say, that didn't work out really well. But over the years, I've had lots and lots of gouramis in this tank, and I still do have the moonlight right there. And I've got the little orange dwarf flame gourami in here, whatever it is. There it is. Or that's a honey gourami, I believe. I did have a female, but she died recently. Again, not really sure what happened. I think these smaller gouramis get harassed by this moonlight. I've been watching this moonlight, and it doesn't seem to be the friendliest of fish. Now, by gourami standards, moonlights are still fairly docile, but this one seems to be a little more aggressive than the other moonlights I had in the past. So, not really sure what to say about that. I've actually considered moving it even, so we'll have to talk about that maybe in another video. I am considering actually moving this moonlight gourami so that I can get a small group of smaller gouramis. I really like those honey gouramis, and when I had the chocolate gouramis in here, I really liked the chocolate gouramis a lot. But they died after I put this moonlight in there, so I'm not really surprised about that either. The chocolate gouramis need to have a fairly relaxed environment, and I don't think this moonlight allows for that. I can't keep water sprite in this tank anymore, as you just noticed what that gourami was doing. It does that all day long. I recently put that piece of water sprite in here just because there was none left from the previous piece, and this moonlight gourami by itself has devoured that thing. That was a huge chunk of water sprite just a few days ago. So honestly, I really probably don't even need to feed that fish. I did do a video the other day about the loaches in this tank too. It was another tank cam video where we got to watch the little skunk loaches dart and dash and chase each other around. We got lots of clicking and clacking noises out of them. So if you haven't seen that video, that is another one that was worth watching if you like loaches, which I of course do. I did shoot a video also about my Siamese algae eaters. I was starting to question whether or not they really were true Siamese algae eaters, and I'm pretty sure they are, but it still just seems a little bit on the fence about that. But I'm still just going to go with calling them Siamese algae eaters because I don't see why not. That was the general consensus, and they do lack the black spots in their fins that the flying foxes have. So I thought maybe because of the yellow coloration in the fins, it might be a flying fox, but apparently the flying foxes also have yellow coloration in the black coloration in the fins. And then these Siamese algae eaters, it just sort of starts clear when they're young and gets a little more yellowy as they age. But that's probably most definitely a Siamese algae eater, so we're going to leave it at that and move on. My 55-gallon T-bar tank. Not too much to speak of in here. I did a couple of water changes recently. I did see a spot on the side of the T-bar's head. And the last time I saw a spot, I wasn't sure what it was. I didn't know whether it was hole in the head disease or what we were looking at. But I did a series of water changes. The spot cleared up and went away, and we didn't have any more issues. So the other day I noticed another little spot, and I did a water change, and then that spot was gone, but now it looks like it has another little spot on the side of its head, or at least it did a few days ago. I did a big water change yesterday, and I haven't really gotten a good look at it yet today. But I vacked out all of the pleco poop off of the bottom, and then I come in this morning, and I'm looking at this. It looks like he's in there making rope. Look at that. So if you're ever thinking about getting a pleco that gets even reasonably large size, and mine, I know it's kind of hard to see, but all of that sort of dark mass in there is the pleco that's in this tank. He's maybe 8 inches or something like that. So think about what you just saw there, as far as waist-wise, and now think about getting one of them big plecos that gets 12 or 14 inches. That is a lot of fish and a lot of bioload. Definitely something to think long and hard about before you commit to putting one of those in one of your tanks, unless, of course, you have a place to rehome it as it gets too large. I'm hoping these are slowing down and are not going to get too much larger over the years, but we'll see. I'd really like to be able to keep them, and I say them because I have another one in my native tank, despite the fact, very obviously, that it's not a native fish. So here is another one, and there is 2 of my Siamese algae eaters. Another good indicator is that they're not attacking each other right now, whereas flying foxes most certainly would be. We got to see them blink or whatever they do where they roll their eyes like that and they turn white for a second. The plecos do that too. That's really neat looking. The flying foxes also do not lay on the leaves like this. That's another characteristic trait of the way the Siamese algae eaters behave. We get a lot of that just sort of laying on the side of the tank. And there's a better look at my T-bar, and you can clearly see that sort of whitish spot up above and behind the left eye there. So that spot is still there, but the spot that was on top of the head is gone. And when I did the water change, I checked the nitrates in the tank just sort of to get an idea of what was going on in the tank. And they were under 40 parts per million. So it's not like I'm subjecting these fish to, really infrequent water changes or anything like that. They generally go anywhere from maybe 10 days to 2 weeks on the outsidest between water changes. And they usually also get pretty significant water changes when they get water changes. So I'm not concerned about the quality of the water. I'm just not really sure what's going on with that little mark. It could be just a little abrasion. He could have just bumped his head into something and it's a scale missing right there and it's just left a little white spot. I've seen that happen plenty of times over the years. So not too concerned, but that is, it's something to mention, something that's going on in the tank. So moving on. Despite me saying we had little to talk about, we're already 10 minutes in and we're not even halfway around the room yet. My 40 breeder finally got in here and did a nice water change and wiped that miserable glass down. That glass had so much algae growing on it, it looked like you were looking into a swamp. And now, of course, you can see it's not a swamp at all. It is a lovely, beautiful tank. So I'm really, really happy with the way this tank's turning out. The combination of off-flux grazers, the types of fish that scour and scrape, between them and then the algae-eating type fish, the guppies, the live-bearing type fish, I'm getting a lot of free tank maintenance, and this tank looks so much better than it used to when I did not have all of those fish in there. The fish now we're looking at, of course, is my Crenocyclo reigani. It's a dwarf pike cichlid. And an awesome fish. This one is a female, and in this case, the female is actually more attractive than the male. You can see those white spots on the dorsal fin. That is indicative of the female, and the female also gets the coloration on the belly. Of course, if I had a pair of them and they went into spawning behavior, the colors would be even more fantastic, but you run into a whole different set of issues when you've got spawning cichlids in a community tank, and I don't like to mess with that, so I generally try to keep my cichlids singularly rather than in pairs. The other thing going on in this tank, I've noticed my molly here is starting to get some weird, well, the light's so bright on it, it's kind of hard to tell, but just in front of the tail and right above its eye, it almost looks like the flesh is rotting away or something. There's like a white spot, and it does not look right at all. And I don't know what that's all about either, because this tank's certainly not neglected, and, that is a very old fish. I don't know how old it is anymore, but it's got to be a minimum of 5 years. I got it from PetSmart back when I was real early in my fish keeping days. That's how long it goes back. I was really, just overly enthusiastic about any kind of fish. And PetSmart has a tank with the plants in it. And what they do is when they get live bearers in, they drop babies in their tanks, or they get a bag that shows up and it's already got babies in it, they would throw them in this, the tank with the plants in it, and they wouldn't be for sale. And they would use them as feeder fish, or they'd give them to the employees if they wanted them. And so one day I saw a little tiny baby live bearer of some sort that I could clearly see was orange up front and black in the back. And I said, "Oh, can I have that one?" And they said, "Yeah, sure." And so it went in my quarantine tank, and it was just basically the resident fish in my quarantine tank for years. And then eventually I took it out and moved it over here, and I put some guppies in my quarantine tank to be the resident fish, just to keep the cycle going and just to keep the tank active. I always like to keep a few fish living in my quarantine tank. I don't have any right now, but for about 2 years, this was the fish that was in there. And so, this fish has some history. It's not some fish I've gotten recently, and now all of a sudden it's getting, diseases showing up on its face. I don't know what the natural lifespan of a molly is, but, it's probably not that long. So, again, I don't feel like I've, mistreated this fish or given it a poor life or anything. I'm just not sure what's going on with it. Again, not a huge concern, but it's something that's going on in the tank and, worth mentioning, or at least it's worth mentioning to me. So, moving on to my native tank. Nothing to talk about really in here. It's still just kind of in stasis. I'm making sure it gets fed every day. I am a little behind on water changes. This is the next one on my list to get done between this and my 125. I know this one is a 125, but that's not what I call this tank. Those are the two tanks left that I really need to get caught up on some maintenance, and then everybody in the room here will have had a water change within the last few days. I've been going around the room and trying to get caught up. So, not a lot going on in this tank. When I'm not feeding them or I'm not freaking them out, then this is about what they do. They just kind of lay in there, and what they're doing is the same behavior they'd be doing out in nature. These are creek chubs. The fish on the very bottom is a white sucker fish, and they're basically lying in the current. The way I've got the water flow in this tank, it's flowing in a sort of clockwise swirl around the tank, and they are in the upstream facing position, just like this large creek chub and this golden shiner. And they're just chilling out. They're just waiting for food to come drifting by, and they'll snatch it as it goes by. If not, they're not expending a lot of energy. They're just hanging out waiting for food to come to them. And that's what they spend a large part of their day doing. Either that or running from predators. Or maybe dashing, swimming from predators. Maybe they don't exactly run, but you get my meaning. So the only other thing I can think to point out in this tank is my regular viewers might remember quite a while ago I had a fish jump out of my waterfall tank and land in my little tank right in front of it that at the time had brackish water in it. And that white suckerfish you can see hiding in the corner right there was the one that jumped out, and it seemed injured when I caught it and collected it. You can see several more fish lying in the current back there underneath my power head if it'll ever focus on them. But when I caught that fish, it seemed like it was injured. It seemed like it had banged its head or something when it jumped. And I took it out. I moved it into my 125 here, my native tank. And ever since it's been in here, it just hides in this corner. It lays right underneath that Anubias until food comes into the tank. And then it swims around and acts normal, eats, and then goes back and lays up under that Anubias again. So really odd behavior. The other suckerfish are out and about and swimming around. They're very active. They usually hang out directly with the chubs. See, everybody's getting a little more stressed out now that I'm walking around. This is probably one of my favorite fish in the tank, and that is a golden shiner that is just getting really big. And I love the orange and black coloration in the fins. So no matter what happens to this tank, eventually there will be a few fish that are in there now that wind up staying in there whenever I wind up doing whatever it is I'm going to do. So we'll just go ahead and move on from that. Nothing to talk about with my snail tank, so we're not going to bother with that one either. My purple spotted gudgeon tank. I did some work on this one recently. I did a chemi-clean treatment. I did not do a back-to-back double whammy chemi-clean treatment like I normally do when I do chemi-clean treatments. But it still looks pretty good. I just did the singular treatment, and I decided as I wasn't hating the bubbles in here, and I really did see a reduction in how much duckweed was growing in here when I had the bubbles. I had a few people tell me that a good vigorous circulation on the surface, a lot of agitation on the surface would really reduce duckweed. Duckweed doesn't like growing when it's got a lot of bubbles and stuff, and so I really noticed when I was treating it with the chemi-clean that the duckweed seemed to be going away at the same time. And so I'm kind of thinking I might leave those bubbles in there. I'm done with the chemi-clean treatment, but the only duckweed I've got is just sort of holed up in this corner right here. You can see the rest of the tank is just sort of a clean, clear, open surface now, whereas this was just a green film. I mean, it looked like a green carpet in here a couple of weeks ago. So, hang on a minute, I got this cloth edge curls around, and when I close it, it tucks inside in the water, and then it acts as a wick and soaks water out of the tank and gets all my stuff up here wet eventually. So I got to be careful how I close the lids here. So I think I'm going to leave the bubbles in there. I'm probably going to try a little harder to do something about that hideous looking hose running across the back. That won't be a difficult task. I can just set a rock on it, somewhere in the middle, and cover it with a little bit of that black sand that's in there, and that will look fine. But I'm really enjoying the way this tank looks. It's the only tank I've got any sort of variety of plants in. If you've not noticed, most of my tanks all look very similar because they've basically got the same 2 or 3 plants in it. This one has some different stuff. Don't know what this stuff is called. I bought it years ago, but I was never able to have it successfully live. But it's doing pretty good in this tank. One of my viewers sent me some, and I wound up cutting it because it was all just laying across the surface. It had roots hanging off of it. And so I tucked it in here. We'll have one end coming out here and one end coming out here. I don't know what this stuff is back here, but I really like that. It looks a lot like some stuff that I see out at the reservoir all the time. I know it's not. It doesn't look the same. It just looks similar. So I really like that stuff. I'm probably going to have to cut this piece here. This is the same as this stuff, I believe. So I might have to be cutting that piece. I can plant that again. And all in all, I'm just really enjoying the way the plants look. I did cut some temple plant down. It was getting a little too tall. And I had some Java fern back in this corner that I removed altogether just to open the tank up a little bit more. So as usual, you can check my email down below. And I do have plants for sale. Again, just check my email down below and we'll talk about whatever you want or whatever. I've got temple plant, Anubias, water sprite, Java fern. I could probably even cut some of this stuff, whatever it is, for 1 or 2 people, but that would be a very, very limited supply of that. So whatever, check my email down below, hit me up, we'll talk. The other thing I'm thinking about this tank is it seems like such a waste of tank. We've been looking at this tank for how long now, and have you seen a fish yet? I bet you haven't, because the main fish in this tank is right there. I have a South American bumblebee catfish that hides in that cave that I rarely see, and then somewhere in here there should still be a rubber lip pleco. The tank is way too clean for it not to be in there, but I have not seen it in I don't even know how long. I don't remember the last time I saw the rubber lip pleco that's in this tank, but there's way too little algae for it not to be in there, and I rarely put algae wafers in this tank because the gudgeon doesn't eat them, and I come in 2 or 3 days later and there's just piles of green mush where I put them, and nobody ever seemed to be bothering them, so I kind of stopped with the algae wafers in this tank. But that gudgeon will either eat or attack any other fish that's in this tank. If it's small enough to eat, and by small enough to eat, I mean basically the same size as the gudgeon, you would be amazed at the size of the fish that thing can eat. Or when I had my T-bar in with it, it attacked my T-bar. I had some other fish in with it, it attacked that one all the time. I think it was a snakeskin gourami at one point. But it's not a fish I can keep other fish with unless, again, it's another really aggressive fish, that can handle the aggression. But I'm not trying to set up like a death match fight I don't want 2 aggressive fish that can take it. I don't want fish that are attacking each other at all. So the choice is basically to leave it the way it is until that gudgeon eventually dies, and for all I know, that could be 15 years from now. Or get rid of the gudgeon and do something with this tank. I would be tickled pink just to see a bunch of neons and guppies swimming around this tank. I think it would be beautiful. But that would just be fish food for that little, I mean, I couldn't put, when I first put rainbow fish in this tank, that gudgeon, when I first bought those Marcy rainbow fish, that gudgeon ate one of them. I'll see if I can scrape up the video for that. I'll attach a card of that gudgeon swimming around with half a rainbow fish sticking out of its mouth, and it got it down. It eventually swallowed it, so that was about a $15 meal. So I learned my lesson with that gudgeon. Anyway, we'll give it some thought. Moving on to the other tank that still needs maintenance, and that is my 125. That is my very last Congo Tetra from way back in the day. We've got my remaining Marcy rainbow fish that didn't get eaten by that gudgeon. Walk past my waterfall tank here. We'll be able to step back and get a better look at the tank overall. So nothing really to talk about this tank except all of the unusual algae I've got growing in here. I've got hair algae that seems to be growing all over everything, and I'm not sure where it came from or why. I never really noticed it before. But now it's just sort of a green film of hair growing all over everything. It's all down there. If you look up here on this stuff. So I'm considering trying to catch one of those big Siamese algae eaters out of my gourami tank that we looked at in the beginning of the video and get them in here, because they're one of the few fish that will eat that hair algae. So my Synodontis catfish that I'd had for years in this tank died not long ago, and since then I've been seeing this hair algae developing everywhere. So I'm wondering if a Synodontis catfish, or at least that species, doesn't eat hair algae too. This is just a great example of how one little change in a fish tank can completely change what's going on in your tank and shift the balance, and you can have an algae outbreak, or you can have all sorts of different things happen simply by adding or removing a fish. You can change dynamics within a community, the way the fish interact with each other by adding or changing a fish. If you've got a nice well-established tank that you like and everything's set up, you think long and hard about just tossing another fish in there. I get people recommending all the time, oh, why don't you just take this fish and go put it in that tank? And, if you think about it for 5 minutes, you'll realize, well, in the long run, this fish would interact with that one the wrong way, and that's probably not a good idea. So it's worth considering long and hard before you just impulsively buy fish that you just put in a tank. It really can change the dynamics of how the fish interact. But this is showing you how the simple loss of a fish can apparently change the dynamics of what's going on physically within the tank. Just having all of this hair algae outgrowth. There we go. I was wondering where my little snakeskin gourami was going to be. This is probably just at the end stages of being at its growth spurt. So it's not nearly full grown yet, but its rapid growth period is probably coming to an end pretty soon. And then over the next few years, it'll finally top out to maybe about 8 to 10 inches, somewhere in there. So hopefully we'll get a good few years out of my snakeskin gourami. Now it does seem to be in there nibbling on that hair algae at least a little bit, or it's nibbling on the roots probably. But those roots have the hair algae growing on it, so as long as it's doing some nibbling, I'm happy about that. Because this tank really needs some serious maintenance. So I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. It's not in dire need of a water change or anything. I've just got the algae that grows on the glass, and a lot of that is due to the big bright LED I have over my waterfall tank here. Just put so much light on this tank, I get a lot of algae growing on the glass, and there's not a lot I can do about that. You know, I just wipe the glass down when I do water changes. So I'm due for that. Once I'm done that, I will be caught up on every tank in this room that needs maintenance at the moment. So moving on to my 20-gallon angelfish tank. I just did a water change, wiped down the glass, removed a bunch of water sprite that was growing, you know, the offspring that grows all through there. I could probably get in there and do that again and remove some more. All of that broadleaf stuff you see growing through all of this spindly stuff is new little rootlings that I can just pluck one out of there and it would be a whole new plant. So, got to get in there and do that. I've got some more new growth coming out. And for anyone who missed it, for all of the times I talked about why I could not figure out I was getting this strange growth on the water sprite that I had in my gourami tank for years, and I did not have that kind of growth on any other of the water sprite, that is the kind of growth you get once it grows up and out of the water. I always thought it was some weird issue going on with it, but it is not. This is the kind of growth you get once the fronds get up and out of the water. I don't know if you can see the fish swimming around in there, but I've got my little bloodfin tetras swimming around near the surface in the water sprite. I really like watching them do that. But anyway, that's what it was. One of my viewers pointed that out, and then once I started checking, I looked in a few other locations where the water sprite was indeed growing out of the water, and in every case, as soon as it came up out of the water, it changed over into being this sort of almost pine needle-y looking stuff, as opposed to the big broad leaf stuff that's within the tank. So that's all that is. That's nothing, no nutrient deficiency or anything else. That's just what it looks like when it grows in the open air. So other than that, I didn't really do anything different. I just did the water change, I did the filter change, I wiped down the glass, and I did a really good superficial gravel vac. A lot of people, when you think of gravel vac, you think of crunching the, vac all the way down, and I can't really do that with the kind of substrate I use. This substrate is designed to sort of settle into layers over time, and if you crunch way down into it and keep disturbing it, you sort of break up some of the purpose it's supposed to serve by crunching down into layers like that. So I do sort of crunch around through the first surface layer, which is generally maybe the first half an inch to 3/4 of an inch deep, and I do suck a lot of junk up out of that. The other aspect of that is that the lower strata of that is really dense. It's like sand. So when you do get crud and debris and detritus that settles down into the substrate, it only settles down through that larger substrate, the more gravelly stuff at the top, and then it kind of stops when it gets to that dense sand. So all you really need to do is vac that surface area. You don't really need to get that really deep crunching down into the bottom to really get it good and clean. So I got a ton of filth out of there when I did that. This tank doesn't have a huge amount of circulation in it. This little 40-gallon filter for a 20-gallon tank. It is a double-sized filter, but you can see that's not a lot of circulation. That's it for the entire tank. I mean, if you look at the Java fern directly in front of the filter, it's barely moving in the current. So this is not a high circulation tank, and the result is I get a lot of mulm and stuff settling on the bottom. So this is a tank that I kind of have to keep the bottom clean. So that is my angelfish tank. We're not really going to talk about my quarantine tank down there because there's nothing in that tank but snails at the moment. And we can now have a look at Butterbean's tank. This is my 40-gallon brackish tank. We'll get that forward turned light on here. So first thing to point out, while I can still see him sitting there, we've got a little bumblebee goby right on the top of that leaf right there. We've got another little bumblebee goby right on the edge of that rock right there. Got another little bumblebee goby right there. So they are cool little fish. I got one just settled down in the back. I really would like to get a lot more of them, like a lot more of them. I'd like to have 15 or 20 of them just all darting and dashing around the tank. I think I have 8 in there now. I know for a fact during my last water change I have 7 because I saw 7 of them at one time that I was able to count. So I have at least 7 of them there currently. But I don't know if I've actually got 8. In theory I do. I should have 8. So the only thing I've got going on in this tank at the moment, well, 2 things actually I want to talk about. One is my sick Molly, and I can see her fins moving. You can kind of make it out right there. You can see those fins moving. She is still all bloated up and blown up. I have increased the salinity in the tank. We are now, I don't know exactly what it is, but we're now well within the range of brackish water again. It has not seemed to have any effect on her. I have been feeding algae wafers into the tank because she does eat. She acts perfectly normal, swims around, does everything normal. So I've been putting the algae wafers in the tank, hoping that maybe if it is a case of constipation, that might help her because the algae wafers have a lot of spirulina in them. I might try the shelled peas, but spirulina, shelled peas, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. My experience with shelled peas is I usually have to get in the tank within the next couple days and clean out a bunch of old peas on the bottom because the fish never wound up getting around to eating them anyway. So with the algae wafers, at least the fish are definitely eating them. So not much to update you on with him, but that's what's going on. I've still got that fish all bloated up. The other thing is I'm training Butterbean. I decided the other day I was going to try putting a little bit of simple enrichment in the tank for him. I know he gets bored, and whenever I'm down the basement walking around doing stuff, I can always see him up against the glass watching me, so I know he needs some stuff to do. I haven't changed up his tank or changed his scenery in forever, and so just to see how he would interact with it, I wound up putting just a little floating piece of styrofoam in the tank. And he spent quite a while investigating it and swimming around, checking it out. And so what I've started doing now is when I used to feed him the floating krill, which is his main diet, that's what he gets just about every day is freeze-dried krill. He'll get a snail or 2 thrown in there, but my snail feeding videos, that's a treat for him, He normally gets the freeze-dried krill. See what he's doing now? He's looking up into that circle. That's what I've been doing. I've been feeding him in that circle. I've been putting the krill in there so they don't float away. And he's already learned that that's where food is. Because normally with the freeze-dried krill, I'd have to show it to him. If he didn't see me put it in the tank, the current would float it away. And then he'd come to the front of the tank looking for food and he wouldn't find it. And I'd have to really get his attention or try to get in there and clean, find the krill that he missed. And so now what I've been doing is I've been sticking my fingers, down through the hole and waggling it around so he sees it. And then as he comes over, I let it go and it floats up in and sits, just sits in the little hole in the styrofoam. And so now anytime I'm over at the tank and walk away, I don't even have to get his attention now. I just put the food in there and walk away. And when I look back, he's over here checking that out and looking to see if I put anything in it. So it's basically a little floating feeding station for him now that makes things a lot easier for me and maybe a little more interesting for him. One of these days, if anybody's interested, if anybody's even still watching after all this length of video, I'll do a video if anyone wants me to about enrichment and giving fish activities and things to do, and challenges, if you will, to get to their food and stuff like that, and whether or not it has an impact on their health and so on and so forth. I actually did quite a bit of research into that long ago and never did shoot a video about it. But there you go, 35 minutes, not quite a record for me, but pretty darn close. That's a lot of video for not having much to say. So thanks for watching. You know how it is with me. Make sure you're subscribed. You never know what you're going to get. And, of course, don't forget this one here is my 29-gallon miscellaneous. So thanks again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.